Diversity and representation in anime is pointless. Spoil sport, blackie, anime tourist. Ugh! Why is Basic Boy always cherry picking? The woke left is ruining the mediocre cell.
Hey, Kay.
Hey.
Oh my gosh, it's been a while.
I know, right? It's been ages.
So, do you have any plans? Any updates?
Well, I'm currently contemplating making a certain video topic.
Oh, you mean the one where you discuss anime from a black perspective?
How did you know that?
You're kidding, right? I know you so well. And you're probably already going through debating if you want to do it, narrating those trolls from last time, impersonating them like before.
No, I'm not that much of a people pleaser.
Yeah. It's that time of the year.
Please don't remind me.
It is time to revisit it again. I know you have more to say, don't you?
Yeah?
Boy, why are you hesitating? You're already doing it right now.
All right, fine. Kashera, roll the tape.
Everybody, let's get the show on the road!
Being a Black woman watching anime is an experience, to say the least.
To be honest, I feel like this is one of those conversations where Black people are routinely gaslighted and disciplined in a particularly anti-Black way.
I first became a fan of anime around the last year of high school. And at that time, anime wasn't regularly shown on TV like how it is now.
There's a way in which this representation of African life is very much informed by Japanese anime.
About 2 years ago, I made a video entitled An Exploration of Anti-Blackness in the Anime Industry. In it, I discussed a polarizing viewpoint on something pretty self-explanatory. It was the second video on my channel that started doing numbers and made me realize that expressing yourself on the internet was a grave mistake. I was simply posting to the virtual void, still do, and didn't expect that video to gain traction of this magnitude at all. While that video came from a place of offering constructive critique, it was still extremely divisive for some people. You see, there's this thing when it comes to being perceived on the internet, because you aren't producing content in a vacuum. People are meticulously watching your every move like a hawk, waiting patiently for you to mess up so they can dogpile and chase you away from creating. Regardless of whether your opinions aligned with my perspective of the topic, I am still very proud of that video. I felt as though I debunked certain arguments and perceptions surrounding how Black people are treated in anime, as well as the community as a whole. However, this time around, we're taking a slight detour of rehashing all that discourse. Those who listened, and those who didn't,
Stand there and argue with me. Or worse still, cry. You can get out of my class. Right now!
What I'm more interested in looking at today is seeing the evolution of how Black people have influenced anime over the years. This will be a revamped version, coming back with a burning fire, and asking the questions one ponders but never attempt to seek answers. Here we go. Black people's appearances and involvement in anime was not something that happened out of the blue recently. Anime had traces of Black people cropping up as early as 1990. For that matter, official contact between the African and Japanese dates back to the mid-16th century. During this time, Black Africans voyaged to Japan as crewmen, servants, and slaves on European ships. Our presence alongside white Europeans drew fascination to Japanese people and influenced the ubiquitous discourse surrounding the divisional nature of race. Japanese history professor Gary Loop, however, states that initially, Africans were subject to admiration in Japan. Various reports detailed the excitement and eagerness of Japanese viewing Africans, and they would even travel multiple days to see them. But the major incident that sparked this history didn't happen until 1581, when Kyoto residents broke down a Jesuit's residence door to see an African in the priest's entourage. The Mozambique man in question would become someone many Black people would become aware of: Yasuke. Taking this a step further, African and Japanese lineages steadily expanded after the occupation period of World War II, where, most fascinatingly, interracial relationships between African GIs and Japanese women were commonplace. The result of these marriages marked a wave of mixed-race children of African descent, and this cultural shift became indicative of Japan's conceptions of Blackness. Shocking as it might sound, Black and Japanese people do have some history, albeit slightly obscure.
I think some of y'all have gotten way too comfortable with, like, asking things that you need to Google, like posting things on the internet as questions that you need to Google.
In the realm of anime, however, the inception of Black characters was largely developed from the Western depiction of Black people in media. This is where much of Black culture in anime found its roots. Little did everyone know, though, that this emergence from the 90s would not only spark numerous franchises, but also animation studios, cosplay, conventions, music videos, celebrity endorsements, controversial designs, and backlash. As you can probably guess, Blackness in Japanese anime truly exploded in the past several decades and fundamentally altered the images of our kind in the medium. What's interesting is the select people involved in spearheading this movement from a perceived homogenous form of animation to these melanated, diverse inclusions. Shinichiro Watanabe, Takashi Okazaki, Sao Yamamoto, Arthell Isom, LaShawn Thomas, just to name a few. A lot of us Black fans, however, point out how historically our visibility in anime has been an ongoing struggle, which is completely valid, but I also think Black inclusion in anime provides a valuable case study for examining how cross-cultural fandoms uphold microaggressive beliefs. Because Blackness in anime is a story about Black people, but it's also a story about oppression. When you think of Black anime characters, what do you think of? For me, what springs to mind is the real-world impact behind some of the legacies they leave. From Coffee, Dutch, Carol, Michiko, Killer Bee, Dorothy, the like, where we see them all over Black anime spaces. This is mainly true when these circumstances the characters are involved in center around their race one way or another, because that's the gravitational pull drawing us into their story, since they resemble us. While the positive impact of the aforementioned characters might seem inconsequential, but it reinforces the attachment many of us have on them, especially when various other depictions were extremely negative. It'd be a disingenuous overview not to mention the egregious designs that have reshaped how creators tackle inserting Black characters. We gotta hit a little snag in the road, as nothing on this channel can be wholly positive after all, since that would suggest that media is without shortcomings and flaws.
In the name of Chief, are you serious? Are you serious? You got the wrong one today!
Because as many people are aware, when it came to Black character designs during anime's notoriety, they were rightfully met with significant backlash. Sambo and Hannah from the Sanrio line, for instance, came under fire for their derogatory imagery, which sparked outrage from the Black community. The company had to do some serious course correcting and address their non-ill intent, which, to their credit, was met with a positive response. Racial unawareness was the impetus behind this incident, but as a business and public brand, this foresight needed to be addressed to make meaningful change. Outside of merchandise, the two biggest examples of this in anime are from OG Dragon Ball and 2001 Shaman King with the characters Commander Black and Joko. You could also put Crone and Simon in this category, but these instances are far from a black and white situation. Mr. Popo from Dragon Ball and Jinx from Pokemon were perceived as racially insensitive when they were transported to the States. The 4Kids network notoriously altered their skin colors to address the backlash those designs received. While Mr. Popo and Jinx aren't black, I'm aware, their design's controversial nature in the US should not be understated and glossed over. Big-time animation producer LaShawn Thomas even commented on this very issue and how it relates to fans' criticisms. He noted how frequently the vitriol is misdirected to anime directors rather than the mangaka in which they are adapting the source material. While directors are able to change things within their anime, they often don't out of respect for maintaining the mangaka's vision. This is where LaShawn and I slightly differ in perspective. Often, anime is vastly different from its manga. There's too many examples here to choose from. It's an endless list. This statement is even more ironic considering The Promised Neverland was used as an example. You mean the fandom that tore the second season to shreds for how it butchered and omitted crucial arcs of the manga story? The same anime that didn't show us the true icon of Black Rep in Promised Neverland. While I'm on my soapbox here, something that's utterly baffling was Shtajio-san's decision to name his black female characters. Most unfortunately, his choice to name a black girl Jemima in the mid-2010s.
Jemima. Yeah, I was like, hold on.
The misogynoir doesn't even stop at Jemima either. If you take a closer look at Crone's name, you'd see an eerie reference for black older sister. Fun fact, Kuro is the Japanese word for black, and ne translates to older sister in English. Kuro. Kuron. Kurone.
Are you kidding me? That's embarrassing.
Bear in mind, Mr. Popo and Jinx weren't even the only times when dark skin / black character designs were changed during this era. Take, for example, the cult classic Hunter x Hunter, with the Zoldyck Serpent Apprentice Canary and Hunter Examinee Garetta. In the 1999 version, their designs sparked heated debates, and even ridiculed by some due to their appearances. In the 2011 reboot, you can see obvious changes in both of their designs. Canary's locks and more defined lips that aren't blown out of proportion closely embody what an actual black girl appears as. The same goes for Garetta and even the few other black characters we get introduced, all of which have distinctive Afrocentric features that don't resemble caricatures. You even had the 2021 version of Shaman King updating Joko's design, and clearly, folks were vocal about their vehement distaste towards the original. To animation's detriment, the large red, ashy lips and exaggerated broadened noses were a staple for portraying black characters during this period. This design choice became so frequent that it integrated itself into many non-black characters. Currently, egregious black character designs have been on the decline. The one rose from the ashes and is why many of us black fans are concerned about receiving a season 2 of this anime. The campy, raunchy adventures of Panty and Stocking with Garterbelt is finally making its grand return. It was announced at Anime Expo last year that Studio Trigger would be animating season 2 of Panty and Stocking. For context, Trigger is most notable for adapting Delicious in Dungeon, Kill la Kill, Promare, and Little Witch Academia. For many, Panty and Stocking returning was a field day of celebration. On the other hand, Blurs had to deal with the eyebrow-raising truth behind a certain character in the title. Many of us voicing how we hoped the black characters this time around, specifically Garterbelt, wouldn't be drawn like a baboon's butt. Above all else, I honestly wondered why these choices were so popular. I needed closure as to why this happened. So I asked my friend Kenji, who is Japanese, if he could give me some deeper insights into this matter. And he provided some very useful insights that I want to share with you all.
I think the biggest question with the depiction of black characters in anime is why do they so closely resemble minstrel when Japan doesn't have a history of minstrelsy? There's multiple answers to this, but the simple answer is that depictions of black people in Japan were influenced by imported foreign media, namely comics and animation from the United States, aka Disney. Huge surprise, I know. This likely established an image of an unequal relationship between black and white people in the eyes of the Japanese public. During this time, there are a few sources of minstrelsy in Japan. In the 1850s, Matthew Perry had gone to Japan and had his white coworkers perform minstrel shows for the Japanese public. Though these shows didn't catch on, this could have been the start of the minstrel depictions of black people in Japan. In 1862, Charles Bergman visited Yokohama and then published a comic called the Japan Punch. This magazine for satirical comics, sort of poking fun of Japan, was actually the start of the monthly or weekly comic magazine in Japan, and also influenced the style of comic that would later become manga. In these books, there aren't any explicit minstrel depictions that I could find, but there are undertones of racially offensive depictions of minorities. Once Japanese borders opened up with the start of the Meiji period in 1867, there would have been plenty of sources for minstrel stereotypes to make its way into Japan. In the 1930s, comics such as Tintin and Congo and short animated films by Disney and Warner Brothers of minstrel caricatures were seen by many who would later become extremely important to the creation of manga and anime. One of these people was Tezuka Osamu. Osamu was well known to be a huge fan of Disney and Western cartoons. Tezuka's Kimba the White Lion established the modern manga format, and something that can be seen in this manga is offensive depictions of black people. I think people really underestimate how different Japan is from the United States. I feel like it's commonly known that part of the issue is that black people only make up 0.02% of Japan's population. And I would guess that a good percentage, if not a majority of these people, live in major cities like Tokyo and Osaka. I bring this up not to excuse racism, but so that people understand the context from which it comes from so that it can be addressed more effectively. Something that I learned in a human rights class I took was the idea of cultural relativity not as an argument for moral relativism, but as a way to better communicate human rights ideals. In other words, anti-racism is something that should be universal, but the communication of that idea needs to align with the framework of the culture that you're trying to communicate it to.
When we look at the evolution of black characters and their designs, they have both a fruitful and loaded history. It's not as simple as saying, I personally wasn't offended by said depiction, therefore you shouldn't be offended. That, in and of itself, is an extremely narrow viewpoint. We must instead learn about the track record of how we were inserted in these mediums and what it means for creators to have us in said stories. Because as one wise man once said,
the past informs our future.
Anime has a major link to black culture. major. So many people working in the anime industry have talked about their inspiration for pursuing diversity in their creative works. One of the most notorious and heralded just by reputation alone is Shtajio Watanabe. He's most heralded for the space bounty hunter icon that is Cowboy Bebop, which has been dissected for eons by fans. The most alluring aspect, of course, is the plethora of black characters in the series. From Abdul, Nero, Jet, yes, that man is black, Google it, and of course, Coffee. It's so clear to anyone that Cowboy Bebop is the ultimate expression of blackness in anime. From the music, hairstyles, clothing, mannerisms were all carefully crafted into the setting and overall story. Several of the characters were actually based on real people, which explains why they're all so multifaceted and layered. However, Cowboy Bebop is not the only series under Watanabe's thumb that utilized black culture positively. The Edo period story of Samurai Champloo encapsulates this very notion. Champloo is a very fascinating case of this phenomenon, as it's widely known the series is influenced by hip-hop and urban street culture. Elite samurai Mugen and Jin are tasked to protect a waitress named Fu so she can track down a samurai who reeks of flowers. After the men get into a sticky situation by destroying Fu's tea house, the trio embarks on a journey to find the Sunflower Samurai and gets entangled in political affairs while traveling. During conflicts with foreigners, native citizens, and criminals alike, the samurai's fighting style is reminiscent of breakdancing. Mugen's swordsmanship especially fits these criteria through his acrobatic b-boy combat sequences that could annihilate just about anyone. And as many of you besties are aware, I am very well-versed. Too well-versed, probably, in the art form of dance, through centering the experience of minorities who face discrimination because of where they originate. The culturally embedded customs of hip-hop present a deeper-rooted existential idea. The hip-hop transcriptions in Champloo, according to Po Lung Huang, intended to reveal not only how hip-hop's cultural practices can be appropriated by anime representation, but also how its cultural expression articulates the diasporic realities and consciousness to fight social injustice. Translated to the real world, urban street dancer Akimoto became involved in the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests. Following George Floyd's murder, he posted a statement on Facebook voicing the importance of fighting to preserve a dance style that stems from black communities. His respect for acknowledging the systemic issues across the world is what Champloo's overarching narrative encompasses, which is providing a space and voice for the marginalized who often feel powerless. The third pillar that cemented Watanabe as the GOAT of handling black anime representation would be the music title Kids on the Slope. Yes, I know I discussed this series a lot on my channel, but I have a reason to mention it besides the obvious. Kids on the Slope is sorely overlooked when it comes to Watanabe's contribution to black culture in anime. It's almost as if it's purposely ignored. Maybe because it's a josei. I don't know. The series is set in 1960s Japan, where our main characters, Kaoru and Sentaro, foster their bond over jazz music, resulting in them forming a band. Kids on the Slope pulls back the veneer of swooning blues, high school antics, and familial absence, and shows us the dark perils of manhood, while also showcasing the sheer amount of effort that is required to make an art form appear effortless. Sentaro particularly uses jazz as a means of escaping the trauma of his past, and it's implied that it stems from racism and the criticism he receives for being a Japanese American.
Huh? Why is that kid next to Richon in all the photos?
It's easy to tell when you see me as a little kid, right? That I got mixed blood. Richie, I'm one of those that ain't got a place in the house, too. Ever since I was born.
Hey, America!
Due to this factor, you'll find that Sentaro is entertainingly vocal about the demonization of POC, and he goes through great lengths to ensure their traditions are preserved.
Stop it already! I can't stand that coon music jazz. Sounds like a jumble of noise. At least play something white.
I couldn't hear. What did he say?
He says he doesn't like black jazz, so we should play white jazz.
Huh? What kind of segregation is that? What are you trying to say, old man, huh?
The series also frequently references black musical artists, such as Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, who are honored for their work in the jazz genre. This is due to Yoko Kanno's exemplary musical composition, who needs no introduction at all. Kanno has this atmospheric and human aura around her composition, but Kiss on the Slope is where she truly shines. Afterward, this is where Carole and Tuesday entered the blackness pipeline in the Watanabe chat. Around this time, we'd see a rise of black main characters, not one-offs, secondary, or making minor appearances. We were mainstays in the cast during the show's run. All of these components of black people working behind the scenes for these projects, as well as the director actively highlighting POC stories, truly demonstrate how important positive representation is. The reason why Watanabe is a staple figure in the black anime community is his drive, passion, and consideration to portray minorities with care on screen. Similarly, there's been a few others who have followed in Watanabe's footsteps and have paved the way for more culturally driven stories centering blackness. This, however, leads me to remove a pin from what I mentioned at the start of the video: the trend of certain groups eliciting microaggressions for wanting us to implant black characters or culturally driven stories. There was a common counter-argument in my original video that explicit racial representation is not needed for characters of color. In other words, superior black representation are characters who just happen to be black. On the surface level, this take seems fine and not something you'd find disagreeable. However, in my experiences with the online anime fandom, this argument gets severely abused. This assessment often dismisses that someone's association with blackness is not always separate from their individuality as a person. Characters such as Michiko, Dutch, and Coffee are so beloved and memorable because their experiences as black people are inherent to their characters. Michiko Malandro, for instance, is a mixed Brazilian African woman living in South America. It would be outright absurd to dismiss her culture to serve the former's purpose. This mentality allows viewers to overlook the importance of embedding cultural stories and perceive all characters of various demographics as a blank canvas needing to be painted. This can result in a deeply dangerous ideology, falling along the lines of relegating marginalized groups as monoliths, and that's something none of us should ever be perpetuating. In the words of D.R. Lasseter, a thoughtful creator takes time to research and understand the timeline and ways that the content appears in culture. Writing the background of a character whose name, traits, and features all align with the geographic and historical context of the story is central to authentically representing racial groups. Pessimism aside, the cultural influence of blackness in anime is a plentiful treasure trove that extends beyond just the medium itself. Major celebrities have been on record of being inspired by anime, and some are even highly involved in the Western sphere of fandom. Look no further than Megan Thee Stallion.
This was such an amazing year for anime, and it's a testament to the talented creators seated in this room tonight. And shout out to all the anime fans watching all around the world.
I am wholeheartedly curious. I love My Hero Academia. I love Attack on Titan. I love Bleach. Of course, I love Naruto. I'm watching Black Butler right now. I'm watching Black Clover too. I like Soul Eater. That one was fire.
Despite what many will say to the contrary, Black people have played a pivotal role in the animation industry, from animators to producers, directors, voice actors, and everything in between. Which brings me to a subject that some tend to ignore when addressing the impact of Black anime. One of the major criticisms lobbied towards us whenever we discuss this topic is centered around Black people needing to create our own anime.
Let's just laugh at him now.
Hate to burst your bubble, but our community has been advocating for this. It just doesn't get acknowledged by other groups of people. And additionally, we've already been doing this. Organizations such as Saturday AM and Shtajio, hopefully I pronounced that right, it is a mouthful, have been a beacon of light for us in this regard. DART was founded by twin brothers Arthell and Isom in 2016 that filled in the gap of a lucrative market of Americanized Japanese anime. The pair were fascinated with the field of animation from a young age and took that passion with them all throughout their educational endeavors. But what truly solidified Arthell's push into anime creation, though, would be watching the sci-fi staple of Ghost in the Shell. It's a series that resonated profoundly and propelled him to reach out to other creatives within the production. Once Arthell moved to Japan, and after lots of persistence, he got his foot in the door as a background animator. Arthell worked alongside esteemed veteran Hiromasa Ogata and learned the unique process and art direction behind one of the most beloved anime. Then boom, Hospital Lights. DART officially enters the picture. However, this time around, we're not like the other girls. Rather than just focusing on anime stories exclusively, the Isom brothers, alongside their colleague Henry Thurlow, transformed animation to music videos. They were also combating the increasing issue of being unable to create their own anime studio here in the US. Despite this, when Arthell was asked what things the anime industry should change, he had a hard time putting it into words. However, I think his mindset could be partially due to his upbringing, which falls under the stereotypical Black experience. Growing up from humble beginnings, remaining grateful for what you have, and uprooting your life so your descendants don't continue this cycle. Just listening to Arthell in interviews, you can tell he's extremely wise and knowledgeable about anime and art in general, but is also super down to earth. Another person who's made a splash in this avenue is the GOAT LaShawn Thomas, who you might know as the person who worked on the Boondocks. Ever heard of the Boondocks? Yes. Of course you have. Literally, who hasn't? It was a juggernaut of a series in the cartoon world. Most relevant for this video topic, though, is LaShawn's directorial credits on Yasuke, Cannon Busters, and Children of the Ether. Yasuke particularly stood out amongst the others, as it all ties back to the origin story of Black people residing in Japan. For the uninitiated, Yasuke was an ONA series that told the reimagined life of the Afro-Japanese samurai Yasuke. He was working with the feudal lord at the time, Oba Nobunaga, who was revered as the first unifier of the country. Despite Yasuke being a foreigner, Nobunaga welcomed him with open arms, even while others ridiculed and fetishized his mere existence. The story of Yasuke envelops the viewers into the world of how Black people are perceived in a predominantly homogenous society, while also showing us how racial unawareness, when handled correctly, can strike a nerve in the most satisfying way.
You know, knowing what I know and, you know, being socially and emotionally intelligent as I am, you know, and being self-aware and the climate, and as an artist, you can't but help resonate what's going on outside of you in the world. You know, I kept those things in mind. I knew the response. It was more about me being aware of what the response might be as opposed to being an idea, because it's a unique story. We love fish out of water stories. And we just don't really get to see that, from a particularly Black lens because of the history of cinema, the history of animation, and where African Americans were positioned at the beginning of that event at that time historically. So this was going to either happen now or it would have happened 20 years ago. Someone would have gotten a hold of this story because it is history.
LaShawn was struck by the 1968 Japanese children's book Kurenosuke when creating the series, and he was entranced by illustrations of an African warrior. Even more telling is that Yasuke was largely considered to be the first foreign-born samurai in a Japanese work. Naturally, with the project's cross-cultural affiliation, it was vital to have the stamp of approval from MAPPA, and they did. But the importance of Yasuke is the potential installment of a new wave of Black animation. While working on the Boondocks, LaShawn expected a wave of Black creators in animation. But to his surprise, it didn't really happen. However, with the implementation of streaming, this climate might shift, and LaShawn hopes that children will be inspired by the impact of Yasuke. A commonality that's become increasingly visible with all these aforementioned workers in the anime industry is that the barriers they face largely reside in the States, not Japan. And I think this is indicative of how Blackness in anime is viewed here and how we view ourselves. We are largely considered outsiders, and the conversations we have reflect our exclusion. Since these organizations and individuals are not at the forefront of people's minds, they often get brushed aside and not properly acknowledged. This is why I'm firmly on the stance that making our own stories won't permanently solve the issue of Black representation. While there are obvious exceptions, our stories are usually few and far between, and as a result, they aren't considered universally marketable.
There's also a kind of economic impetus for representing other ethnicities, but African Americans in particular. Or I should say, there's an economic impetus to efface and exclude their representation. That is to say, if one is producing anime and you produce it solely for a Japanese audience, then you are kind of, from the very outset, limiting the potential viewership, which in turn means you're limiting the number of people who can buy merchandise and things of the sort. So then in order to expand the base of potential viewers, one creates these nationless anime, in which it could be kind of an any person happening in any world. And this in turn allows more viewers to find kind of points of entry, avenues of entry into the animation.
Insinuating that racial representation must solely lie on the targeted demographics advocation limits the outreach, connections, and collaborations these stories need to gain mainstream success. Cowboy Bebop, Samurai Champloo, Afro Samurai, Cannon Busters, Michiko to Hatchin, and Yasuke would not have the same relevancy if there weren't collaborations with individuals of various racial backgrounds. Oftentimes, these comments mainly serve as a dog whistle, since most individuals who spew this rhetoric off don't actually care about engaging in diverse works. It's, once again, a technique used to silence minorities rather than a suggestion for seeking a potential solution.
It's not as simple as just making our own stories. We do. It's the industry that we try to push those stories through that's the issue. Will blackwashing save us from any of this? Girl, obviously not. Christian J. Warner references what they call plastic representation, wherein representation is artificial while being shaped to look like meaningful imagery. Warner applies this theory to the act of blackwashing, arguing that it's used as a strategy to suggest progress without tackling the structural issues that limit said progress.
In this same vein though, I'm not trying to suggest that everyone should throw hands for Black people because of this reality. Far from it. Some don't want to have to think too hard about how we're portrayed or the impact of our work so long as it isn't offensive. Fair enough. But don't devolve into anger directed at Black people. When in doubt, you don't care enough about the topic, regurgitating the statement that representation doesn't matter and relegating it to us forcing creators to include diverse stories means nothing if you are not the targeted group affected. Reiterating this rhetoric means you are complicit in the degradation, subjugation, and gaslighting of marginalized groups, specifically in this case, Black people. Rather than playing devil's advocate at every turn, we should be supporting projects with Black people at the helm and listening in on our experiences, both past and present. Because tearing each other down and getting furious at people for enlightening others on these topics doesn't benefit anyone. So long as Black representation in anime matters to me and the myriad of people in the anime community, we're gonna continue talking about it.
Hey, how'd it go?
I mean, I recorded it, so must have went decent. Sorry if that sounds super negative. I'm just like mentally exhausted.
That's honest though. So as long as you put your best foot forward, that's really what counts.
Thanks, I really appreciate the support.
Well, I gotta head out, but you should definitely keep me posted on the video and do not be afraid to post.
Will do. All right, thanks. Bye.
All right, bye.
Whew. I did it. I conquered my fear of making this video. I'm honestly not sure the response this one's gonna get, but I'm pretty sure I have an idea.
Courtney! Your curls are acting like you! Count! It just went downhill from there, so that's not good.